I was preparing these talks for the Braver Leaders group sitting by the sea, not because I live by the sea, and most certainly not during my holiday, but because I know this is a productive, creative space for me. There are two things that have helped me enormously as a leader. The first is mental space for growth. When you give yourself the mental space to create, to think, or even just to be, you up the ante on how you perform, what vision you have, what matters, and what you need to be braver about. For this to happen, you often have to deal with the second thing, taking responsibility for yourself, which is about how you show up, how you behave, and what you need in order to be the leader you want to be. Knowing these two things and repeating the lesson more times than I'd like to admit to doesn't mean that it was easy for me to take time or space. Honestly, I felt rather guilty leaving the office, leaving everyone else to look after our clients and the rest of the work, while I sat at the sea prioritising something I love. The fact is that writing is my job. It's one of the few bits in the business that only I can do. And if we're going to support leaders to be braver, I have to both model that behaviour and get the content and resources done, right? This means interrogating some of my own patterns, the things that get in the way of me doing what I need to do. My pattern for many years, well, most of my life probably, is one of presenteeism, of always being available, of being the go-to fixer for my family and friends and at work for many years in the NHS. After all, I was in emergency care. I'm not saying I'm reformed now that I'm my own boss, but I am much more aware of what it costs me. At some point in my young life, I learned that being a fixer makes you valuable, popular, and in demand, and I liked it. It served me because actually I'm quite introverted, I'm not great at social banter, and I was never going to be the life and soul of the party, so I might as well be useful. And it served me really well until it didn't. And even then, it took me a while to realise just what being a fixer was costing me. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of upsides, and I still love being able to help, sharing my wisdom, and getting my teeth into a really gnarly problem. But I've also learned that I need boundaries. I can't do stuff for everyone else at the expense of my own well-being or my work. And that being present for everything and everyone all of the time is neither desirable or doable. This didn't happen overnight, by the way. It took me years of experience, a severe bout of anxiety, and a lot of study into psychology, neuroscience, and all things human to reframe my own thinking, my perspectives, and my behaviour. And I'm still work in progress. The expectation that I should be there and I need to fix stuff for everyone is much more internally driven than based on the demands of others, although we absolutely do teach people how to treat us. So I have a quandary. I'm all about being brave, stretching yourself, doing the stuff that matters to you. And at the same time, I'm potentially behaving in a way that does the opposite. Linda will know what to do, or worse, Linda will fix it. At best reduces problem-solving capacity, and it potentially creates dependency, which is a really long way from what I'm about. But the fact that I'm no longer useful fills me with dread. This dread is completely of my own making. Somewhere along the line, my brain linked up usefulness with being valued and being valued with love. Obviously it isn't, but it took me a really long time to get there, and even longer to unravel some of the behaviours. And honestly, I still have to work at disentangling these links sometimes in order to maintain healthy boundaries. You might be wondering why I'm sharing this, where I'm going with it, or whether I've just had too much sun at the seaside. The thing is, I'm not unique. If you're in this Braver Leaders group, you may have a similar story, or one where you became the class clown, a wild risk taker, a people pleaser, or even tried to stay invisible. Because often, braver leaders are the mavericks, the misfits, the quirky people who see things differently, because we're each changing our corner of the world, or at least working on it. And yet we're human. We also crave belonging. So you too may have developed patterns and behaviours that enable you to fit into the environments you found yourself in, that ultimately help you to feel loved, valued, respected, or whatever your version of good enough is. I invite you to investigate your patterns and decide how they serve you and if they're costing you more than you're willing to pay. Conformity and conditioning have a lot to answer for. If we're lucky, we get to spend our lives undoing some of the patterns and behaviours that have held us back and stopped us being the person we're capable of being. More often, though, we just get better and better at fitting in while living a life of quiet desperation. It takes courage to break patterns, to be different, to be yourself, because you may have created some conditional beliefs around your own validity, and you've probably taught those close to you, at home and at work, how to treat you and what to expect based on these conditions. It can feel really risky to move those goalposts. When we strive to fit in or belong at any cost, what we often do is we sell out on our own beliefs in favour of those of the group. To be clear, fitting in is where you adapt, tone down or ramp up your own traits to fit in with the group. You might dress like them, speak like them, behave like them. You're accepted because of your sameness. You conform to the expectations of the group and all is good. Think any high school movie ever. But actually, it's much more serious than this. It's our schools, our colleges, our organisations and workplaces, our clubs, our religions, sometimes even our families and friendship groups. You can't possibly expect to fit into all of those and still retain some sense of identity. The chances are they're all asking something different of you. Belonging, on the other hand, is where you can rock up and be yourself and you're accepted anyway. It's safe to disagree and be different. When you feel like people don't quite get you or you're on the periphery, it's quite likely you've just not found where you belong. Even the most independent and self-sufficient of us need connection. When you really belong, you get that sense of connection. Whether you're in the middle of everything or quietly observing from the sidelines, you just know. By the time we grow up, most of us have learned to fit in, but not all of us feel like we belong. So we moderate our behaviour and our emotion, only sharing what's acceptable in that environment, often at the expense of our own priorities, our values, and ultimately our mental well-being. In short, fitting in is sometimes necessary, but it's rarely good for you in the long term. This matters to you as a leader because work, or specifically your work communities, are the second most important place that adults find belonging after home. Get belonging right and you have a loyal, committed team who are proud of their contribution, who feel safe to speak out, who will contribute their ideas and expertise, and who will police their own group to make sure that expectations and standards are met. Even more importantly, they are behind the mission, maybe not for the same reasons as you, but that's okay. They're in it because it matters to them. Unfortunately, we're often very rigid with our expectations at work about how, where and when you show up, about what you do and how you do it. And some of this is necessary, of course, but a lot of it is much more likely to be custom and practice, workplace culture, and simple control. When you don't create belonging, your team may conform with what they have to, but they will create their own pockets of belonging, which may or may not serve the greater good. If you're interested in belonging, you'll find some more talks specifically about this in the group. Circling back to you as a braver leader, it's hard to create belonging if you don't know what it feels like. Spend a few minutes at the end of this video answering the following questions. Do you know what true belonging feels like for you? Where do you feel seen, heard, valued, and proud of your contribution? The chances are these are also the places you feel belonging.